All right, so now we have the image on watercolor paper, and I've washed it down to knock it back just a little bit. I removed my fingerprints, graphite, oils, anything else that it's now like a clean slate and it's ready. So now that I have my water and my eyedropper, I take my water. I'm gonna need a lot of water for this part. This is going to be a base coat. A base coat I usually do in a pink or a yellow or an orangey yellow, something that's, or light green, something that's easy to cover with later and subsequent paints. A red can stain, blue can stain, and a dark green can also stain, and you might not want that. So I try to take it easier on the initial rounds of watercolor, and then I get progressively darker. Okay, so we got the water, have our little dish, we have our brushes. I just selected about 3 I'm really going to use. This larger brush for coverage. So in watercolor, the whole thing is white, right? It's the image on a white background. And so you're adding color to it. And so it'll start off light and get darker and darker as you cover it more and more. So the key to watercolor is to preserve the white parts that you don't want covered. And that's my main focus on my first round. My first round is coverage in this pink. I'm gonna cover everything, well, on certain ones. We got 3 images. I'm gonna try to do each image slightly differently. So for this one, should I all of it except for the white? Maybe that might be a good idea. Or we'll just try things. Also, sometimes as I get closer to the end of this one, it's starting to separate from the harder backing, and so I have a little clamp to keep this right from totally separating. Something to note to keep that together. So there's this image, but then there's also this image, and lastly, there is this one. So I'm going to try to do each one slightly differently to give you an idea of some of the possibilities. So I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to do this one, but let's get started with first, oh yes, and also how I washed it down. I have my big flat brush, and then I go to a sink, my kitchen sink usually, and I wipe it down. I get this really wet. I wet this whole brush from the sink and then wash it down. Wash it down. And I do this about 3 times. That's usually as much as a paper can a paper can take. It'll start to separate at some point, and we'll note that as we get further along. So first one we're going to do all wet. Wet into wet. So for wet into wet, I get my clean water. I have my wide brush, and I wet the whole thing. All the parts that is going to be colored. And I'm going to try to omit all the white parts. So the eyes and the teeth, I will try to keep dry so that when the pigment with the water spreads, that it stays somewhat contained. Somewhat in that watercolor is very, okay, it's chaotic. It can be chaotic in that you cannot control water 100%. Water tends to do what water wants to do. And my desk is slightly slanted, so water will pull downwards. So I have to note that. So, okay, so now on her right arm, she has a sweatband. And I usually save one, depending on which dimension she's in. It'll change from a dark and white bands. And so even, I don't know why I'm saying this. This is kind of inside baseball. Even dimensions, it's 2 white or 2 black and 1 white. You don't care about any of that stuff that makes sense in my head. Okay, a little bit more. Now, being watercolor, the water is going to pull downwards in the colors. All right, they're gonna go this way. And I try to be careful, but some things you just can't control. Let's do the eye also. So my first layer is always a base coat. This is a very jacked up brush, but it'll get the job done. So I have my colors, and then we add it. But when you stain colors, so it's already wet into wet. This is the first technique. The image is already wet, and you're adding water with pigment to it. So wet into wet is what this is called. And it diffuses the colors that the pigments is being dispersed into what's already wet. And so it makes for usually a softer, it softens the colors. And in this phase, since it's so early, I'm not too concerned about ruining my masterpiece. I'm just blocking things in. That's pretty much all I'm doing here. Paint and then water. And one thing to note with watercolor is that when it dries, like right now, I'm gonna have to stop after this because it's all wet. Well, I could do other paintings and then return, which is kind of why I like to do 3 at a time. 3 paintings so that I can rotate while one dries. I can start another one or do certain work on another one and then hop between them. And I tend to find that that works for me. All right, now let's clean up some of these edges. So yes, it'll dry lighter. So whatever you see right now, the colors will dry lighter than the pigments show right now, which is sometimes why it's difficult to gauge the colors, because you'll see it next day and it'll be lighter, even if you use darker colors. So that's one thing to note. Let's get this spiky hair. And I think we'll be done with this one. And being precise is not exactly watercolor's forte. If you want precision, gouache would be a better bet than watercolor. Even more precise than that is oil paints and the like. And then even more control is digital. Digital, you have an undo. In live, there is no undo. What it is what it is. What you see is what you get. You can alter things, you can correct things. Say with colored pencils, I could scratch out different things. But overall, There is no undo. If you make a catastrophic mistake, that is what it is. All right, and that is the first one. So this is what we got right now. Take the brush out of your mouth. This is base coat. Now on just this one. Did it all over. Well, like, I left out the white bits. The next one we'll do all pink. Just, it will cover even the white. And then we'll deal with the white part later. So let's go on to the next one. All right, for this one, we shall do, should I do this one first? Or this other one first? We'll do the other one first, because I have an idea about how I want to do this. All right, so this is going to be number 2, number 3, number 2 in the sequence. So in this one, we're going to try to do just the flesh parts in pink as the underpainting. And then we'll do everything else, like the green of her dress, the green of her tank top, her underclothes, all of that with a base coat of those separate colors. So let's do all pink. And this is a variation on dry brush in that there is no, I did not wet it beforehand. Right, this is the colors as the colors is laid down. Again, it'll dry lighter, but I did not pre-wet this. Okay, trying to be careful of the spiky spikes of her hair, pointiness. So again, her eyes, the white parts of her eyes, I'm trying to avoid, but I'm filling everything else in. And we'll call this one number 3. And since it's an odd, I'll just have one white band. So the middle part will just be the white band of this little sweatband thing. So got my loaded brush, and I'm just pulling the colors downward. Because again, I'm slightly on a slant, and water tends to want to go downwards on a slant. So I'm using that to my advantage. I'm not fighting it, but I do want to watch out for other areas that I won't be painting today. And that is her clothing. So I got some of her teeth. And mistakes will happen. That's normal. And usually at this phase, it's not a problem. Okay. So we got her head and most of that stuff. And now, so I usually go again, like inking, upper left to lower right, upper left to lower right. So I'm not dragging my hand through wet paint. Again, at this phase, it's not too bad with watercolor. Okay. Her tail, which is again on, and tail. So all her flesh will be the pink. So again, go from left to right. At this part, I'm not usually pinpoint accuracy. I'm going more for coverage than precision. For better or worse. For better or worse. Okay. Alright, so that is all the pink. We'll let that dry. And then we could, let's get her out. Do I want her eyes? No. No, I don't. So yeah, we'll just leave all the pink and then move on to number 3 for today. All right, so now we have number 3, and number 3, well, number 1, we did wet into wet with the pink, avoiding the white. Number 3, we did just the fleshy bits in pink, dry brush, or more or less dry brush. So this time, we're gonna do all of it dry brush, just all of it. even the white parts. So let's go. So again, I haven't pre-wet it. I did not add just water to it, and we're just gonna go in with the colors. So for some areas I can't get with a bigger brush, I go in with a smaller. Okay, so that's the spiky hair on that side. Now drying can be a somewhat complex issue. For myself, I usually do a coat and then I let it dry. Some keep painting, and as it dries, right, so I'm just covering all of it. As it dries, they introduce new colors, and that is a way to do it. The problem is if you're new and you try to do that, sometimes it can get muddy. So for beginners, I usually would recommend doing, it's almost like paint by numbers, where one day you'll do, for myself, this is what I do a lot. First day, pink, or an orangey, pinkish underpainting, I guess you could say. And then day 2, you can add on to that with another color. Day 3, add another color. Day 4, and so on and so forth until the painting's done. And I feel that is the most beginner friendly. And then once you are acclimated to how certain colors perform in different situations, like for example, I know what I can cover, and by cover I mean I can lay down a color and know that it won't stand out when I put a color over that. But as a beginner, sometimes that can be a difficult thing to do, and hopefully we can get more clear as we go along, because sometimes it's harder to explain than to show somebody. This is what I mean. But this is day 1. This is coverage. All coverage. I think the only thing I'm going to not color is her dimensional gem thingy. I'm going to just leave that. And of course, always feel free to experiment. Sometimes I just do things, I want to see what happens. If I do this to a painting, how will it change it visually? Will it not? Now I try to do it fairly quickly because you don't want like a dry line. Like if I left this, the edges would dry and be darker. And if I reintroduce the paint, you might still see that area where it was once dry, and then I went back and painted it. And sometimes you would want that, and sometimes you wouldn't. So it's up to the artist to figure out, okay, what is this one's. Once you get acclimated with it, you can figure out what you do and don't want, what you can and can't do. Where you're working, for example, some people, they will introduce white like gouache on top. I do not do that. I try to let the white speak for itself. Now I will sometimes scratch out like highlights, like for eyes, scratch out with an X-Acto knife. So that is something I sometimes do. But by and large, I do not use gouache unless it splatters for stars. I do not use gouache in my watercolor. But again, everyone has their own methods, and you can find what method works for you and lean into that and do that. It's your painting. You can do whatever you wish, and usually you'll to figure out what you want to accomplish with each painting, and then set your sights accordingly. And so that is just the pink dry brush. Was not pre-wet. We're gonna let these dry, and then we'll come back tomorrow and we'll see if there's any noticeable differences between each of them, and then the next steps. So my beginning is fairly slow, broad. I try to cover the whole thing, and then as we get deeper into it, we'll go in with different colors and keep pushing these until they're done. All right. So that was day 2 officially, and that is a base coat pink. All right, so this is day 3 or so, and today we'll be doing orange, or an orangey brown, a yellowish orange. And so I have my colors: Quinacridone Gold, Windsor Yellow, Yellow Ochre, Gold Ochre, Windsor Orange, and Indian Yellow that I put all in this one. And here is just Indian Yellow and Windsor Orange. So just the 2 colors. All this has all of my orangey yellow colors. And now let's get started. Now sometimes it's always good to do a check. So I have a little space up here. So let's see if we can get these colors. This is just the Windsor Orange, Windsor Orange, and Indian Yellow. It's not mixed as well as it could be. This is gonna be bright, isn't it? And we'll let that dry. So this is the 2 colors, and this is all the colors. So I'm mixing them all together. So this should be darker than this. So let's see. And it always helps to have a test page. They look about even. They look about the same. Well. Well, maybe just a little bit. We'll see how it dries, and then we'll check it. I'm not too worried at this stage, because we are, slide that over, slide this. I'm not too worried about it at this stage because we're just blocking in. This is the week of blocking. And by blocking, I mean this is like the earliest in the process. So last time, on this one, we did wet into wet, and then we introduced all the pink. And I think we'll try to keep that same energy, that same philosophy for this one. Well, we'll try to keep it the same for each. So this one we did wet into wet. This one, what did I do? I think I did dry brush, just pink, all of it. And that was that. And the third one, I believe is, yeah, I did just the pink for her flesh tones. And now we're gonna do the orange in the flesh tones as well. So let's get started. Wet into wet. So again, a lot of water. I got my water, and I'll probably use just should I do this one or this one? We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. So, and I'm not too worried about bringing up this pink color. Sometimes I do a pink orangey color at the start, just so I can save myself, especially when I know what I'm doing. I'm gonna leave the nose pink, I believe. All the pink things should stay pink, but since we're doing wet into wet, it shouldn't be too bad. Okay. So now, orange. Which one? Let's take a look at what happens here. So this one looks a little bit brighter and this one looks a little bit duller. The mix of all the other paints making this one just a little bit more saturated than this one. But we'll see as it completely dries if that is indeed the case. So let's go with the more bright orange. And we'll use this for the, or maybe a combination. Ooh, that might be nice. More dry brush on the ends because I can't quite get to them. And this is just a demo, so I'm not too concerned about keeping it exact or not experimenting. Just, if you're gonna start off with watercolor, just have fun with it at first. And then you'll figure out how you want it, which is pretty much the process of everything in art. You just want to see what you're capable of at first. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Can you bend it to your will? Some things just don't click, and that's totally fine. Like, I like gouache, but I don't know, I don't quite care for it like I do watercolor. And people can be like that. You can like things and not like things, because some things just aren't made for you. It's like, nope, don't like it. Okay, so the pink will be our base, our bottom level base. We'll exclude the nose and the little spots at the corner of the eyes, and we'll paint everything around that. And of course you can experiment with, if you let things dry in certain places and then you go back in. Okay, do a little bit more between her eyes. Alright, okay, so orange is pretty good. I was talking about some of the other colors yesterday that can be covered up fairly easily. And yellows are good for coverage, but they're easy to cover themselves. So we're doing just the skin tones and the hair, and I need to remember that. Okay, more wet. So her body, arms, hands, tail. Actually, I could have waited on the tail. When I draw and paint, I talk to myself a fair amount. Others might also, this might be an artist thingy, or working through our mental problems out loud. I did too much on this side. So we're going to take it and move it over. Take it and move it over. Take it. And again, I'm not too concerned. So I'm not too concerned at this point, because I don't think we're anywhere close to being done. As it gets closer to the finish, oh, messed that part up. I starts to switch from just playing with it to don't mess it up. And that's no way to live your artistic life. Right? Don't feel too bad about your mistakes, because we're all just learning. Try to put the time in, and if we put the time in, hopefully the results will be what we desire. But sometimes you can you can try to fix it and it won't fix, and then you just gotta chalk it up to, well, I guess that one's a loss. So there we have just this 2-color orange, which is Windsor orange and Indian yellow for her skin tone. Again, we'll let this dry, come back tomorrow, and we'll probably do her underclothes, and then maybe Friday do the green, Or we could do underclothes and the brown. Maybe that for her hair, stripes, like a reddish brown. We'll see. But that is this for today. And again, we'll let this dry and then we'll make a note tomorrow about the oranginess. So let's move on to the next. All right, so this is number 3, but we're gonna do this in, well, number 2 as a sequence, but you won't know that because I'm gonna edit all this out. But anyways, so for this one, we're gonna do both of these colors. Dry brush, no wet until wet. So we're gonna stack this on top, let it dry, and then come back. So this is the first in the sequence of doing just the Windsor orange and, what is it? Indian yellow. All right, so, or should I do wet until wet, let that dry, and then come in with that? I think that might be it. I make things up on the fly all the time, so this is just how I play. All right, so we'll do wet and wet, which means you pre-wet the paper first. So a copious amount of water. And since today is a warm day, some would say it's hot here in LA, that this dries fairly quickly. And that's why I usually save watercolor for the spring and summer and fall, because in Southern California the heat lasts for quite some time. Okay, so wet and wet for the body. And remember, we're moving from upper left to lower right. So this is okay. And also some paper takes paint differently and takes water differently. Some paper will soak up the water, and sometimes it will sit on top more. It depends on the manufacturer of the paper, and sometimes I can just get bad paper, even if it's a trusted brand. Something in the process does not quite do what I want it to do. It's fairly rare, but sometimes it happens, and it's frustrating. All right, and again, we'll exclude her nose because she's got a pinkish nose. And it's okay to paint differently every single time, because sometimes I change it up, where it's like I don't want to do it a way I usually do it. I'm going to do it something different. Again, it's your art. You can switch it up at any time. If you get bored, if it's not looking right, if you just want to experiment and see. All right, that's that. Wet to wet for this arm. And coming in for the tail. And the more water you use, the more faded it looks. So I usually sometimes try to do the most watery parts first, let it kind of sort of dry in certain areas before I go in with the watercolor. And sometimes I can try things just to see how it will look in the end. It's like, I don't know. I have an idea, but I don't know. Once I do it, then I know. Wait, and I probably should have painted that one first, because I'm forgetting the rule. Up, down, left, right. Well, I think I can do it. And just don't forget that there's paint here. Or it's wet here. Alright, that was shocking. Okay, so for the feet. So you could say at this point, it's more or less staining. Like I would say that I am more or less staining the paper with the pigment. All right, and that is first coat orange phase 1. And we'll let this dry, and then we'll come back after we do number 2. Or what I'm calling number 2 in my mind. Okay, so for this one, I think we're gonna do the same with number 3. And that is we're gonna use both these oranges. And we're gonna do dry brush on both. Yeah, I'll try that. So just the straight Windsor orange and Indian yellow. We'll do that first, let it dry, and then come back and put this on. Also dry brush. And dry brush it's totally dry, because I haven't touched it since yesterday. And we just go in and we paint. And the colors will be more vibrant. I can use a larger brush. I just have to be careful in getting these spikes up right here. So I want it smooth. So I try to keep it from creating dry outline lines. So I have to keep it moving fairly quickly. When it's wet until wet, you've pre-wetted the paper, and so it'll dry less quickly. Right now, I gotta go quick. And the more you stretch the paint over an area, and what I mean by stretch is if you dip it and then you paint up here, and by the time you get down, there's less watercolor, and so you're stretching it downwards or upwards, but it means it's going to be drier at the end than at the beginning. Almost like how if you're say doing ink with a brush, there'll be less on the brush at the end of the stroke than at the beginning of the stroke. So you stretch the ink along. I don't know if that's making any sense. I think it is, in my mind. Right? So we're running out of pigment in the brush, and so it'll make it lighter as we stretch the paint downwards. Okay, we got that. We think we got that. Touch-ups in corner. Okay, so that's her head, arm, hand, and sometimes of note, if this was drying, and then I was to do this arm and then touch in here, you could have some bleed into a not so dry area. So, something to be aware of. Okay, so that's that. Now we have this. I could do it with a larger brush. The proper tools for the proper situation. It's partially what art is, I think. Just gotta remember there's a band here. So again, I'm flipping between tools, this bigger brush and this mid-size brush. Okay, and now the hand. Gotta be careful because it's a smaller area. It's big enough though. We got this. Okay, that's that. It's a pretty warm orange. Okay, so now it's tail, leg, and because usually a tiger's tail is whitish, I could have done wet until wet here, and then dabbed, and then, or dab, and go that way. Could have, but I didn't, because I'm not too worried about that. Again, we're going for coverage. All right. Now, as I'm switching brushes, you might be thinking, I hope he doesn't drop that brush onto that art. And I have done that before. And I will do it again. Because butterfingers. Hopefully I just didn't jinx myself. But yes, it happens. Or sometimes you drop it as you're switching brushes onto your canvas. And all of that time work now has a blemish. Again, sometimes that's just art. If you can fix it, sometimes you can't. Alright. So let's continue with this one. And again, watercolor is an imprecise medium. It doesn't have the control of, say, digital or even gouache and oils. So you gotta embrace the chaos. Embrace the chaos is what I would say. Alright. Some touch up on this side. And so that is first pass of the, what is this? Indian yellow, Windsor orange. And then we'll let this dry. It should dry fairly fast. And then come back in with the all orangey brownies. Alright, so this is going to be round number 2 of the orangey orange. And so we did first this Windsor, oh that was loud, the Windsor orange and Indian yellow. Now we're going to do this one, which is a combination of all my oranges and yellows. Well, orange yellows, slightly orangey yellow browns and whatnot. So again, we're going to do some wet the areas and then introduce the colors. So let's give this a shot. So wet in the wet. And for this, I still haven't cleaned the brush, and I'm okay with that. And so I'm going to avoid the hair because I'll make the hair in a reddish brown. Okay. So all my oranges, dab that. I'll do this. All right. And again, we're staining more or less. It makes the colors softer. Okay, now I'm going to avoid the hair. So I am muddying up my water. And that's okay, because I have another to the side. We just want, now we're going to get into the tricky part. Tricky part is her face. Okay. I'm going to try to avoid the hair, eyes, and just go all the way around. It's not going to be perfect, but we'll get it as close as we can. Okay. Again, more water. Get some of these small areas. Make sure we got it. We got it. Good, good. And now, as you'll notice, sometimes I reach for my water and I want the color, and vice versa. And that happens. Alright. Get this underneath the chin. Alright, that's that. Wet it. I was going to say something maybe inappropriate, but we won't do that here. I'll just chuckle to myself. Okay. And let's do that tail. Okay, and her hand. Alright. And the legs. Sweep the legs, Johnny. And good. And her foot. Okay. Again, we're just more or less staining it the color we desire. And that is a lot of the effect. Well, we won't. For the foot, it's already wet into wet, but I don't want to go to the edges. Go it down the center and let it diffuse out. Or at least that's what we have in mind. Okay, more water, and you can do a whole painting like this where you're just using wet into wet and see what the effect is. It's fairly interesting if one wanted to try that. Okay, get that orange. All right, so for example, you could do wet on the light side and then have it darker on the dark side. So if I wetted this and then pulled to the dry area where it would settle differently, but we're not too worried about that as of yet. Okay. And that was the second layer of all the oranges and yellows and browns and whatnot. So we'll let that, don't touch anymore. I had to fight myself. Okay, so that is this. And we'll come back tomorrow and we'll do other areas. And since they're separated, we can bounce around. We can do the underclothes, hair, wings, some stripes. But we'll see what we can get into tomorrow with this one. All right, for this one, we're gonna do the orangey, all the oranges and yellows and orangey yellow browns, and do just her skin. So let's get to it. Dry brush, no wet into wet. So we're not gonna pre-apply wetness. We're just gonna go in and paint. And this is dry brush. And dry brush, I noticed, dries faster than wet into wet. So, okay, so all of her skin. Should I go this way or this way? Maybe a combination. Means we gotta go quicker. Quickly now. So I'm trying to exclude everything that's not her skin. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect because I can do over stripes, because the stripes are going to be an orangey brown. And you notice I use more color when I do dry brush because it's not already pre-wet. So more color is used and more concentrated color. Add that. Okay. The face is most important, and so I usually take a sigh of relief once I do the part that is most important, the face. You know, with dry brush, of course, you can do highlights, which is just not touching the parts where the light would hit it, or you can do that on subsequent rounds. Okay. Sometimes I'm moving too quick. It's like, slow down. Okay. And now her tail and legs. I could have used a bigger brush, but we're already in it. So let us carry on. Okay. And her feet and the last bit. Okay. Let's say that is just about all right. And that is second coat of orange. And we did all of it before, so her hair is what the old color was, layering up to her skin, the new color. So watercolor is additive, right? We're layering on colors. And so that is 1, 2, and 3. But we went over the body color of orange today. Tomorrow I might do underclothes, hair, maybe some bits and bobs here and there. Hello again. Okay, so today is day 4, I believe, and we are working on more colors for our watercolor summer project. So yesterday we ended with orange, just 2 oranges, and then all my yellows and oranges. And this I'm turning this into a red orange, which I'll do her hair, and then some of the stripes. And we also have more colors for today. I'm leaving all the multiple yellows and oranges in this one clean and pristine, and you can reactivate it with more water once it gets dried out. So that's okay. So let's talk about the green shades and the blue and what I used as the red brown. So I have the base yellow, and then I put alizarin crimson, Indian red, burnt umber, and burnt sienna, and Van Dyke brown. Van Dyke brown is one of my favorite colors. It has a very rich chocolate color. It's beautiful. Lays down beautifully. And in the reds, alizarin crimson, it was what I used the most in the reds. And some burnt sienna. I usually use that a fair amount. So that's what I did for this, and that'll turn this orange or yellow orange into a reddish brownish orange. But we'll take a look at that. In the green category, first let's get some water in these. So this is what used to be just yellow orange, and it's now going to be a red orange. Usually I put 3 drops, but I might need more, so I put about 5. As for the green section, I have 2 versions. These 3 are my basic set for greens. If I want to do coverage for grass, like a grassy field, trees, I usually start with somewhere in these colors, and it's green gold. Love this color. Green gold, olive green, and permanent sap green. This is my basic coverage overall in general section of greens, and I use that for this. And this is going to be her Beautiful Beast Kisses shirt. I will paint that a little bit. And then for darker variations, I have the Perline green, which is a very dark green. And then Windsor green, called also yellow shade. So Windsor green, yellow shade. I find this comes out more of a bluish to me, but it's good for like foliage shadows. So this is my dark section. And usually I'll start off with the base, put that in each of the light and dark. And then if I want to darken it, I add these 2, the Perline green and the Windsor green, to make the dark section. And so this will be her tank top and and dress. So light and dark. And her eye color. And now let's also add some water. 1, 2, 3. You could also pour it in, but sometimes they can get messy. You're probably a better pourer than I am. I pour it very badly. I'm gonna add a little bit more to this one. So 5 shots from the eyedropper. Okay, so now let's talk about the blues. I got the blues. So this is going to be her undershirt or underclothes and other bits and bobs. So like the green, I start off with a base light color for the blues. If I want to do clouds, I use a lot of wet until wet. And my go-to colors are cerulean blue. This is like a very base shade for the clouds. Cerulean blue. I use this a lot. And then after that, cobalt blue. It's one of my standards. And also, this is my favorite. This is my favorite blue. And it's called Windsor Blue Green Shade. It is one of, I think, the most beautiful blues I have ever seen. Windsor Blue Green Shade. Love that color. I use a lot of this. So if I want to do more clouds, slightly darker than the cerulean blue, I always go to this. Use a lot of this. So when I want to go a little bit darker on the spectrum of blues, I use French ultramarine and ultramarine green shade. But these are, I'd call these more filler filler blues. Like if I remove them, I don't think I'd be missing too much. And I might one day combine them into just one middle blue. And my favorites on the darker end, Prussian blue. Prussian blue is, I wouldn't call it a fan favorite, but it is a great blue. A general purpose, all around standout blue. That would be Prussian blue. It has, for me, been replaced by this Winsor blue green shade. But combined, their powers combined, superb. Love it, love it, love it. And then indigo is a newer pickup for myself. Indigo for a dark blue. So if I ever need dark colors, I usually go for Prussian and indigo. I'm still trying to get used to the indigos, but these two are great for my dark shades. So my lighter, my intermediate, in between, and my dark shades. And I add all this into the blue, because at this point we're just doing a coverage phase. Okay, let's put some drops in here. Nope, don't drop it in there. 2, 3, 4. Let's do one more. So I usually do 3, but we'll double that. Okay. So now I have the colors that will hopefully get through today. Anything else I want to say about the colors? I don't think so. And also, like this, where I'm altering this yellow orange into a reddish brown orange. Sometimes I also do that with the blues, where I will add some reds to it to try to make it slant towards the purple realm, purple spectrum, or I just put in purple shades. But we'll do that when we go into the darker edges of when I paint. So those are the colors: blues, greens, and brownish reds. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have or where we left off. Okay, bringing the images back in. This is where we left off with number 1, where we use wet into wet. All of this is wet into wet. And you can tell that the colors are slightly uneven and a less saturated, less punchy, less crisp with wet into wet. And that's kind of, I like the softness of wet into wet. And so this is number 1. Number 2, or is this number 3? This is number 3. Number 3, we're doing each colors in sections. We didn't do the whole thing in pink as a base color. We're doing everything in its proper section. So we started off with pink for the flesh tones, and then did the first layer of yellow orange, and then the second layer, wet into wet, of the darker orange, I believe. So that's where we left off on number 3. Number 2, this is all dry brush, straight colors, straight pigment on paper, no wet into wet applied beforehand. So that's why this one looks so much bolder and crisper. This is what dry brush will do. Dry brush, the colors are more saturated, more punchy when just applied directly, as opposed to wet into wet, dry brush. It's also slightly more stable. The colors can shift and be softer and slightly more wonky. It has that watercolor randomness feel that I can feel, especially in wet and wet. Dry brush, very stable. And sometimes I usually do dry brushing more at the end, because I have the colors locked in, and then I bring it, bring the saturation and the punchiness up. But this is just how I tend to work. So let's get to painting. Mix and paint, mix and paint. So first I think we'll start with the underclothes. That bluish purple. Okay, so I have a very old beat up brush. These are my two mid ones that I use a lot. Or should I do the hair first? If I want to go down, you know, up, down. Yes, change in plan. We're gonna do her hair first and then do the underclothes next. So we'll rotate and stuff. Okay, so this is the brownish red, mixing all the colors to get all these colors together on top of what was left of that yellow orange base. So we're using that as a base to jump off of. So that color is still here. That yellow orange is just mixed in with red. And again, red is it's a more difficult color to control than yellows, oranges, and greens. It's a high staining color. So I have to be more careful with reds and purples, because if they get into an area where they're not supposed to be, it can sometimes be trouble. Alright, so we have our red, a larger brush, and our water. Okay, again, wet into wet, and then the red of that hair. So we have to try to control it and keep it where it's supposed to be. But this is coverage. I'm trying not to go into other areas where that red brown should not be. And okay. So we got that base, more or less. And the red brown. Gonna try not to put my hand in the wet water or staining it. So touch, pull it down, touch, pull it down. So you'll notice that it bleeds, right? It's flowing through the water and softening as it goes. I'm trying to move fast before it dries, but I'm not too concerned at this point. It could be more faded on top than on the bottom. So far I'm liking the color. That reddish brown is working for me. Okay, let's reapply some water, right? See that bleeding. Move it into place. I usually try to start with some of the hardest stuff. And I knew her spiky hair would be more complex than some other things. Not in difficulty, just trying to get that coverage. Alright, so one more. Okay. Now sometimes with watercolor it can be more about feel. And like the orange, that yellow orange, you can't really see it currently, but I know it's there and I can feel it. And also I need to see how it looks when it dries, because things dry and get softer. All right, and so that is wet into wet hair. I might do the stripes more in dry brush, but we'll see. I'll let that dry. And so that is Beautiful Beast Kiss, her hair in red. Let's go to the next one. All right, so now this is number 3. Same deal as the previous one, or number 1. But we'll do the hair wet into wet. So I'll probably go from this side to this side. Sometimes it's about making a plan and then carrying out that plan. Trying to avoid your ear. Okay. Okay. Let's pull this up. Sometimes when I have too much water at the bottom, because I'm on a slant. I'll push this up and away from the area just to get all that water from pooling in that one area. Okay, I want it slightly darker here. And then as we get, okay. So let's see what happens when you have wet and you apply it, a lot of it. Okay. All right, water reintroduced to colors will push that color back the way it came in general. In general, because sometimes you don't know what the water is going to do. If you're on a slant, if a certain area isn't dry, sometimes the results can be chaotic. So I have to sometimes remember that. So chaos is part of the game with watercolor. Alright. Alright, and that is her hair. And you can still see it's moving it. And that is number 3. Wet into wet. Oh, take that. Wet into wet hair. Number 3 done. Now let's do some dry brushing for number 3. Alright, so another thing, probably should have done this earlier, is when you have a swatch or test sheet, let's put this there. You can test your colors before you apply them, which is highly recommended, especially when starting out. I've done this enough that, and let's put the red here. Oh, no, put it here. And a test swatch paper next to you is sometimes good if you want to see it and then see how it dries. And you can also put another, once it dries, put a little bit of on an end to see what 2 layerings will look like. And then 3 layerings will look like, and so forth. So let's dry brush that hair. Dry brush, no water. Okay, again, we'll move this and go this way. Sounds like the most logical thing for me. Okay, that's this side. Let's go up and over. And I usually do one color. Well, I try to do as little a day as possible with watercolor so that I can allow it to dry, because you'll notice I'm actually I have my right hand on her physically, and if the paint was still wet I couldn't do. So I try to focus on one color a day, including variations of that color. So if I'm doing a green and all the various greens in the spectrum of green, I'd do that, let it dry, and then come back the next day and then do more. That's just how I work. Now, unfortunately, if you are working like as a freelancer, sometimes you don't have that option, and you have to get it done within the time limit, because that is professionalism. And in that case, sometimes you have to just keep moving. So you would apply all of one color in that situation. And I have a hair dryer or a fan or something. And I usually work in 3s, usually, so that I can rotate between things. So it doesn't feel like I'm just wasting my time. I was wondering about this area. I made a mistake, but it'll be alright. And this is the beginning. Like, this is for beginners. This is how it would start. Sometimes getting all, I wouldn't say fancy, but bringing out all the properties of watercolor on your first try can sometimes be intense, and sometimes you want to ease yourself into it. And I feel like this is easing yourself into it, because it's more or less, it's like paint by numbers. Once you know what area is going to be what color, you could dry brush the whole thing. And while it can look a little bit flatter, there are ways to give it depth, dimensionality, and all that. But in the beginning, this is how I usually start paintings, and this is what one can do for the whole painting process. It takes away some of the stress of worrying about how the water will react, and especially if you don't know exactly what those reactions will be. You don't want to ruin, like, no. All right. And that is the red of her hair for 1, 2, and 3. So this is 2, 1. Right, the water knocks it back. This will dry lighter, but currently, what we currently have right now, slightly lighter than this. This is dry brush, usually saved at the end. This is wet into wet. Well, water, the paint is wet, water wet, applied to an already wet surface. Wet into wet. Again, and you can also apply the water, let it dry slightly, and then paint into it. But that's that can get even more complex. So this is just the basics. All right, this is lighter than this. I'd say, you know, more water than this, and definitely more water than this. I wonder how they'll turn out. I guess we'll find out. Okay. What's next? Now let's wipe off the excess, and then water bucket and clean off the brush fairly well. Okay. And now we can move on to another color. So what color would that be? I think the underclothes would be good. All right, so now let's do some blue. Blue, blue, blue. So we have all the blues in my blue area. And we'll start with the dry brush first, or number 2. Yeah, number 2. Which everything will be dry brush. No wet into wet. Try to make sure the blue is properly mixed. Okay. And again, you can test it out. That was a reddish, so that's blue. Now her underclothes are more or less a bluish purple. Depends on how I'm feeling, which is going to go in. Also, a blue is what I use when I'm doing outlines. Like I can do the outline for her eyes, some outline bits. I use well, I'd let all of this dry, and then again, down, upper left, lower right. So I'm not dragging my hand through paint. This is just about all the blues in my toolbox. Okay, is that? We're gonna make her armband. We will make this lighter by adding, I just dipped it in water, like so, and then whatever's on there. Okay, and now her, back to the paint. And blue, like red, can stain, so I'm more careful with blues and reds, where I apply them, how much to apply, is it wet before, because if you get a bleed into another color, and of course colors can change, so a yellow and a blue will make a green, and sometimes you may or may not want that. And right, and I usually go from, I usually start with more complex things, and then as it gets simpler, I move on to those sections. Also her nails, I can paint in this blue. And toenails. Alright. And that is number 2 blues. Alright, so now wet into wet for the blue is going to be slightly different, as since it's more detailed stuff, I'm not going to use a larger brush, but we will already use the brush that has blue on it and dip it in the water and move it. And since this is number 1, I'll give her 1 blue. Again, dip in water and then spread that out. So we're using all of what's already on or in the brush, the blue, dipping in water and then having coverage. And that is that blue. Now I can dip it in and then stain what has already been done. Alright. Let's do this little armband. So dip that in water. Alright. So that's rough, wet into wet for some of the tighter areas of blue. For number 1, let's do number 2 now. Alright, number 2, same deal as number 1. We've already got blue on the brush. Dip it in water and then move it into place. And since this is number 2, I'll have 2 even blue bands, and so everywhere there should be blue. And of course, watercolor is about experimentation. You can try to do less water or more water. Some people use a spray, like a spritzer. Okay. Now I also want to have this in blue, but I'll leave that when we do the. Also, this bottom one I want darker. So we're gonna leave that. And now we'll apply direct blue. So it's like wet into wet, just with already pigment on the brush. Again, I want all of this part to also have blue, and that bleeds into the wet into wet, and some blues in the shadows also. Okay, and now for her ankle cuff. All right, and of course we could do fingers and toes. For her nails, because she is a tiger girl, she has these claw-like nails and she can extend and retract them. Alright, and that is that. Did we do it all for you? Yeah. Okay, so next up is greens, light greens. Yeah. I was thinking about it. Yes, light greens next. Alright, now it's time for the greens. Greens. Light green first, and then we'll move on to the dark green. Got a little swatch, and let's give this a practice. Let's see what the color looks like. But I know pretty much what it does because I've done this. And this is a light green. It has green gold, sap, permanent sap green, and olive green. Those are my light shades. Okay. So for this one, there's more green than normal because of the snake. I'm gonna have the two-tone snake. So again, her eyes are green, and again we're dry brushing this one, which means no wetting the paper before we apply the paint. She looks much better with her eyes. Okay, so yeah, this is my coverage green. Whenever I have to make like a grassy field, forest, this would be my base. So her eyes are green. Also the snake. Should I do her dress and then layer the darker green on top? No, I'm gonna keep them separate. Okay. Art is problem solving, just sometimes in real time. Okay, so I'm gonna have the snake green. So you'll notice that I've been rotating. I have a painting 1, painting 2, and painting 3. And this is my standard procedure because of the time it takes for watercolor to dry. And you can go in and reapply paint to a wet surface clearly because it's watercolor. But to prevent bleeding on a large scale, I usually do it day by day, one set color. But with 3, I can rotate and do one painting and then move on to the next and so on. I try not to go above 5, but it depends on what's going on. Usually 3 is my max. Well, that's not true. 5 is my max, but I try to keep it manageable with 3. Okay, so her shirt, her eyes, the gem is green. The dress is a darker green. Also, usually I go slower in my everyday. Yeah, we're gonna go this way and then back. Dry brush also takes up more paint than wet into wet. You can get more coverage with less actual paint with wet into wet because the water is already doing a lot of the major, but also it'll look softer. All right. I'm looking at it and thinking, did I make enough? But yes, I'm good. If I had to do 3 with dry brush, I'd be running out towards the end. But since we're doing wet into wet, so this will be the official underbelly color. Now we're gonna get into a danger zone, because I would probably go this and then come down, but I think my hand won't be in too much danger of moving through paint. And I always, when I paint, I'm hoping that I'm not jinxing myself. It's like, don't say something and then you do that mistake. Sir, don't do that. Are snakes' tongues green? I don't think snakes' tongues are green. So, so we'll leave that. And usually at the base coat, this is, well, the blocking in base coat phase, you start to see the vision. But I think on round number 2, you really start to get a feel of what's it gonna look like in the end. Okay, so checking. Oh, forgot her little green, her cat's eye gem that allows her to jump through dimensions. And I think now that is it. And then when we do the darker green, we'll do so this is the underbelly color. And then we'll do the darker green and for the dress. All right. That is green. It's not easy being green. All right, green for number 1. Since we're doing wet into wet, I don't think we need too much. Okay, so we got the color, dip it in the water, and I forgot to do her blue of this side. Oh. How about we also do the eyes? That would be nice. Green eyes. All right, back to the shirt. Or tank top, I'm sorry. And I think that's it. Oh, I forgot the band too. In blue. Oh, we'll get it in a little bit. First, stain those eyes and stain this. Now in the reintroduction, or staining as I'm calling it right now, you could leave certain areas if you wanted to imply like there's a light source, right? Then you can have more water, like if there's a light source, more water up here, leave this more or less dry, and then go from this way up and then bleed it into. One could do that. All right. Green eyes. And last up, number 3. All right, number 3 green. Same deal as number 1. Well, you know what? I was thinking about her eyes. Let's take that. Seize the opportunity. Make them a little bit darker. More saturated. More poppy. Okay. Now let's do water. Now let's take a look at what I was talking about before. If the light is here, coming here. Alright, let's see what happens if I do wet and wet here. And then do just straight green. So So as you see, we added water up top. We did a more dry brush from the back and the lower part. And we're just letting it bleed into what we did wet. And that's just a small example of what can be achieved. And you can do this all over the painting to have light and dark parts. You can bleed another color into it. You can introduce other colors into it. Sometimes it starts to get muddy, but within reason, you can do all sorts of things. Okay. And since her gem is green, the light coming off of it will also probably be green. Alright, we could also introduce more up top. Alright. And now, time for dark green. And I think that'll be it for today. Alright, so now this is all my greens mixed. So we have the light one in here along with some darker green. And let's test this out. Ooh, there was a drop of darkness on it. But we're good. Alright, so again, dry brush. Green. The inner part of her eye is that darker green. So, and the upper part of the snake and the dress also green. I could use a larger brush. Should you do that, Trey? You should. You should. Well, let's do this first. Alright. So a larger brush, dip it in water to wet it. It makes the smooth, okay. And of course, it doesn't have to be perfect. You're just trying to get, all right, let's continue getting some of these tighter areas. We're gonna leave this part until we get there. Oh, did I? Oh. Now, because green and blue are close to each other, I sometimes can lay down a green and then cover that, or make them blend with blues. And that's sometimes a nice effect. Okay, so also I can do shadows for green in a blue color. And those seem to work well. Alright. Now, yes, I should. And then it's easier to pull colors towards yourself than push them away. But maybe that's just me. Okay, so, okay. And that is green. Yeah. Alright, dark green for number one. So first off, let's do her inner eye. The pupil, or the cat slit, if you want to call it. Okay. For the dress, we'll do wet of this larger brush that has already been used with green for that other, what, number 1, number 3. All right. Now for the dark. Okay. All right, and that is the darker green for her dress. For what, number 1. All right, same deal as number 1. Some wet into wet. But I want to get this eye with some dry brush. And now this has already been used for number 1 and number 2. So we're dipping it in water and going for coverage. I'm gonna do this now for a little bit of variation. Right, if this is a light and it's beaming out, so let's say that of the darker, it would be here, and especially over here. So there are various ways that you can imply that light is coming off of something. So in my mind, this area would be darker, mid with white highlight, well, light green highlights. All right. Is that it? I believe that is it. see. Tomorrow will be, I guess, little bits and bobs. Like the stripes, the wings, and whatever else we can think of. So that is, I believe that. So as you can see that we're getting more and more complex, or the painting's getting more and more complex. But we got it blocked in, more or less. So I'll see you tomorrow. Hello, celeb people. Well, today is day 5 of watercolor for the summer study. And let's first talk about colors. So today we're going to do the stripes for Beautiful Beast Kiss, which are brown. And so we have the already, what was once the yellow orange, and then we changed that to a red orange, a reddish brown orange for her hair. Now I have done all the browns, and those browns are burnt umber, burnt sienna, magnesium brown. I don't much care for this. I think I need a brown with some more punch, some more something. So I want to use this so I can replace it at some point. Also sepia, which is a dark mud color. I don't quite care for this one either, but again, I'm trying to use it to eventually get rid of it. Van Dyke brown. Van Dyke brown is my favorite brown color. It's a nice, Van Dyke brown is a nice chocolatey brown color. Love it. Love this color. So I need more like this. If I can replace these two with something in the spectacular in the browns, yeah. So that is that. Also, for some detail work, we're gonna do wings in, well, not detail, but the wings in a permanent mauve. Permanent mauve, I use this a lot as a base for blues and purples. So this is usually my starter for that, and this is running out, so I have a new one. But also permanent magenta. I usually combine these two together most often to make a nice, a light purpley lilac color. I love that as a base, and then I usually build off of that with darker purples or blues. So this will be wings, and then also blue for the inner wing. So those are the colors. So let's get my little dropper. Since it's on this edge, I'm going to turn it. And so that's 1, 2, 3. This is probably too much, but I want it more. Do I want it more watered down? We'll see. We'll keep it like this for now, and then we'll do this later. I want to keep some of this pink because I want to redo her nose after we mix. So I'm going to mix this, and then we'll come back and bring it on the actual things that we're going to paint. Now for the paintings that we are continuing, we are doing Beautiful Beast Kiss number 1 in chibi form. This is all wet into wet, but I'm going to change it up today, doing some dry brush for the stripes because I want those punchy. And number 2 is Beautiful Beast Kiss, You're the Snake, and this is all done with dry brush, no water added beforehand. Start this up again. So it's a bit bolder, and that is number 2. And number 3 is a Wet into Wet, Beautiful Beast Kiss for comic chapter 3. All of it wet into wet, done in sections of each individual colors. Well, this one had a base of pink, like a pink base, and then we built up everything after that. So they're each done slightly differently. So let's get started. Let's start with the nose. Let's do some of that nose. So we'll go backwards from here and start with, so I put a couple drops to reactivate this pink, And we're going to get as much of it as we can without touching that magenta and mauve. But I just want just a little bit more pink for her nose. Pink is a heavy cover color. By that I mean it can be covered fairly easily, so that's something for me to note. Anything else needs pink? I think we can wait until the next round, but I just wanted to punch up that nose, although it's starting to bleed. So that's number 3. And now we have number 2. Do this nose. So that's this nose. The corner of the eyes. Alright, and that is number 2. Now let's go to number 1. Same thing. Might be too much, but it'll dry and fade. Okay, now that we've done all the pink, I believe, we can now mix this permanent mauve magenta. And this I use for the wings. This one I might have to add it just, will it be fine? Yeah, I wanted some indication. Since I didn't draw it, I'll have to make it up on my... So I sometimes forget to draw things and then add them in later. I would not recommend that. Well, it's your painting, you can do whatever you want. But for myself, I try to remember everything before I put it down onto paper. To me, it just makes a smoother experience. Alright, that's number 1. I don't think number 2 has it. Has wings indicated. Nope. So we'll just leave it as that is. And you have wings. So usually I have the most of it in this magenta, and because it's a easy coverage color, meaning it can be covered and it fades pretty substantially, in my opinion, that I can do dry brush. Or maybe I'm just lazy and forgot that we're doing wet and wet on this one. Well, we did it for the first major round. Usually I start off wet into wet heavily, and then after that, the subsequent rounds, it gets more dry brush and more dry brush, because I want the colors more and more saturated, bolder as I go along. So the wing, and then the inner part of the wing is blue. Since I'm here, should I do the stripes? Yeah, that would probably. So the stripes for all of them are going to be dry brush. So let's clean this off. It's nice to have a napkin handy. Dip it in water. And once you see no more color, you're good. All right. So this brown used to be the orange and yellow, Indian yellow. Just those two. And then we changed it yesterday to a reddish brown. And with that, we did her hair. And now we did all the brown colors, added that to this. So now it used to be orange, yellow, to a red, brown, and now it's a reddish, but brown. Allegedly. We got our swatches, our test. And we'll test this right next to that red brown. That's a nice brown. We'll see how it dries. Because yes, things usually fade, lighten and fade. So this was be first, then second, and now this. So let's put those stripes on. Okay. Again, we start from left, going down to bottom right. So we're not putting our hand through watercolor. Also, as I go along, usually the brushes get smaller. Or I start off with a larger brush, and then by the end we do a detail pass. Eyebrows, reddish brown. Now for her eyelashes, I'll usually do a dry brush blue or purple. Usually I start with blue and then by the end it gets towards the purple. Okay, she's got her signature 3 stripes on her face. Okay, and this is the part where I can start to relax. And that I should have most of what I need. The colors are mostly there. Okay, from the tail, I usually go from the back. So it's white, brown, orange, and then you continue. Okay, and of course, you'll sometimes have rituals or processes that you do over and over again from a built-up experience. And for me, this is my pattern. This is what how I usually do with the watercolor. It's fairly simplified, but I don't think everything has to be complicated all the time. All right. And so that are her stripes. We're gonna let that dry and then add the blue for her. Actually, we'll probably do the blue for her inner wings and then outline her eyelashes just to punch those up. So let's go backwards. It's number 2. Okay, so that one was number 3. This is number 2. Again, putting on stripes, eyebrows first. So we're coming towards the end of the week. And I usually go in a weekly sequence. A lot of times it's 2 weeks, but this is a block in. And I think we got everything we need in the span of a week. And then usually I wash it down, whether that's usually not at the end of a week perfectly, but whenever I have all the bits that I need, the painting is pretty much blocked in, then I wash it down, let it dry over the weekend, and then come back the next week to add the second phase or second layer of colors. So I usually work from wet into wet, and then second phase is more we get more and more dry brush. I thought you had one on it. Oh well, I'll check if I have it. Hold on for a second. Here's the sketch for it. I didn't add it in the sketch, so I thought there was a stripe on her upper arm, her bicep, but I don't see it there, so we shall continue on. Okay, should I do the tail first and then probably? So what am I gonna do? This one I did her tail slightly differently, in that she has solid bands and also these stripe-like, and not all the bands are perfectly, or stripes are perfectly like this one. And then it continues past her leg. So I got this part, and then this part, and then of course there's stripes. And I think that, and that is that. So we have our stripes, and is that it? I think that's it. All right. Next to number 1. All right, so this is the all wet into wet, but we're still going to do her stripes, dry brush, stripes and eyebrows. Now there is some thoughts about, every artist is different. Every artist's process is slightly, they make it their own. Even if they've been taught by someone, usually over time, it becomes their own way of doing it. And so some would say that the watercolor should be just something like this. Like this is pretty much should be the end of it. You put the waters down, you know, your colors down, water down, and that is a complete painting. But for me, this is just a phase that I continue with. And that's why I call this the block in phase 1. And in more complex watercolor paintings, ones that have different characters doing different things, different colors, it can be very complex. Especially if you're doing like 1 color a day, 2 colors a day. Usually I don't try to go past 3, or I also try to keep it to 3 separate paintings at the same time so I can rotate between them. And for speed and just workflow, to me, I think that works for me the best. Everybody's different, but yeah. I usually paint mostly in the spring, summer, and a little early fall. And then I wrap it up and then come back the next spring. And usually because in Southern California, it's rather warm most of the time. And I like having that warmth. Will dry the paintings quicker, and then I just rotate between different paintings. I have seasons for things, which is a thing. Okay, so this time we're going to start from here and then go down because I forgot to color this orange. So as a cover-up for my earlier mistake, I have done that. It works out the same. I said I usually go from leave this and then go stripe, 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 every other one, and it worked. Okay. That is okay. So now we come to the end of, well, stripes. We gotta do some blue for the inner wings. But that is, she is all striped up. Stripes, stripes, stripes. All right, so she's pretty much at this point done. Just, oh, that's speaking too soon. I still have to do that blue. We're gonna wash, clean the brush, and then do the blue. All right, so now the blue for each of these characters should be pretty fast because there isn't much to it. So let's start with this one, as it doesn't have much in the way of wings. Just get some blue. Try not to put my hand through some of the brown that I just did. Okay, it might be too dark, but it'll dry lighter. Okay, that was... Should I do her eyelashes now? Why not, sir? Why not? Okay, again, try not to get through. So I punch up her eyelashes. I can also do this in dry brush. I mean, the detail phase part thingy, but I think this looks better in the image overall because darker eyelashes help define the eye. And since the audience eyes will go to the eyes of any character, I usually give the eyes special treatment or special more focus. See, doesn't that look better than before? And yeah, usually I start with a blue and then move it towards a purple, but I layer it up. Every phase I come back in until the final phase where I do the ending details. Very tiny brush and more concentrated colors. And we'll talk about that at the end of this. See, that to me looks better. It gives her eyes some definition. I can also do that around the actual eye, but I'll probably do that with a darker green. And we'll save that for tomorrow with some details. But currently, I also like to punch up this arm, leg, what you call it? Because that's going to be one of the darker parts of the whole thing in general. So that's number one. All right, her eyes I think look better, more defined. Number two, again we're going with the eyes with this blue, And of course, blue is a high staining color, so I'm gonna try to be careful. And by staining, I mean it won't come up as easily as other colors. Like I can cover a yellow, some lighter greens, no problem. But reds, purples, and blues are more difficult to hide if a mistake is to occur. Okay. That's her eyes. And what do I call this? I keep wanting to say leg brace, but it's not. Anklet, but it's one of those when a person is a prisoner and they're chained to like a ball and chain. That's what this is, but I don't know what the without the ball is. And without the chain, the part that attaches to the part. So that's number 2. And number 3, okay. I guess this is a proper place to talk about things getting muddy. So after you layer things over and over again, it starts to be what I call muddy. And if you keep layering things over and over again, there's also more chances of bleeding. It's like the colors won't sit where they're supposed to sit, and so that's why I usually do it in phases. And once things start to get out of my control, I wash it down and start again. Well, not totally again from the beginning, but in the larger scheme of things. Okay, eyes number 3, and then her ankle thingy. Okay, you can also tighten things up in the detail phase after phase 3. I usually don't go more than 3 phases. So that is that. Anything else I want to do? Oh wait, her wings. Yes. Almost forgot there. Number 2 doesn't have them, number 3 does. Okay, is that it? I think that's it. Alright. Okay, so she's pretty much done, I'd say. There are some things I would like to note. So, for colors, right? At the end of the week, you'll notice that some have dried out. This, all of the yellows and oranges is now dried out. This one's gonna be dried out pretty soon. The green's dried, the light green's dried out. This green is almost dried out. The blue, not dried out. Brown, not dried out yet. But what I usually do is I leave this, once I'm done, mostly, I'm done, I then let it dry out. So I let this sit out for the rest of the day, all night. This is a fairly warm room, and just let it dry out. Right? The water will evaporate and leave just the pigments. And then once that happens, I then use that for detailing. So then I would take, I don't have my smallest brush. I take a brush, I dip it in water. So I'd have my water, I dip it, and then have a little pocket of water and the color. And then I, dab into that, leaving more pigment. And then I use that to go over some edges. So you'll see, so let's give an example. So if you'll see for their underarm, right, there's a little thing, and I would do this in a dark brown, right? Very saturated, very condensed brown. So once I let that dry, I dry brush this as a detail. I'd also do that for under her face, her head and chin. Also this green part of her dress, I do that in a blue and green. And the bottom of the gracilis. And that's what this is for. So I'd be tightening up these lines. You can also go over all the lines with dry brush, concentrated colors, and that punches up the drawing itself. I do that intermittently within the painting process. Once I have enough, after the week, it starts to get dry, let it dry, and then you can always reactivate it with more water. So next week I could use the same colors, just reactivate it with eyedropper, water, bring it back to life, and then you can paint. Just make sure you mix it well, and then you can go from there. But we'll go over this more tomorrow, as we're going to do those detail-y parts tomorrow. So that's what's coming up. And we're coming to the end of this week, and it's looking good. So I shall see ye tomorrow. Later. All right, so this is day 6, I believe. Maybe 5, I don't know. So today we are going to, our watercolor is now dried out. The magenta, we got a brown, orange, green, light green, green, and blue. So now that they're dry, what I usually do now is I can either use a water dropper, but usually I just water, and then I'll probably do a brown. So I just put in a little bit. Right, I'm wiping the brush on the side, and it drips down in, and I don't need a lot. I don't need a lot of water, and I can adjust it as we go. But I have my tiniest brush, and now let's go to, so this is what we ended with Beautiful Beast Kiss. Her outline is, the overall is pretty much done. And now I'm just going to touch it up, add some lines where I think it is needed, and so there will be a lot of brown. So I think I'll start with the brown. So dip it in the water, and then we're reactivating, but it's going to be a much darker, richer color. And this is usually how I do the detail work. So right now I'm touching it up, just giving it that extra oomph if I don't ruin it. So I've already, when I was doing the drawing process, the under of certain forms like the lips, the chin, certain parts of the arms and legs, and that was made for this reason. So this is a super saturated, very not watery and dry brush, which I do at various points of the process. I used to only do this at the end, but lately I've started touching up after the end of a week of watercolor. Just reintroducing some lines. Okay, so for her arms as well. So it's like the undersides of arms, legs, her head. And then I'll wash all of this probably after I let it dry for a day. Okay. And her legs. Now for me, this does a few things. You're reintroducing lines that can get lost. It supersedes the blue sorrel paper in that we did to get that image down. And I think it helps the overall image. I don't always do this, and in the past I didn't really do this. But now it's just become it makes it look better to me. All right, and that is the brown. Wait. I wanted to get some of this hair. I just dipped it in some water. Okay, so that for the brown is done. I'm gonna go back with some dark blue a little bit once I get all the browns down. I usually try to focus on one thing before moving on to the next thing. So that's that. So number 2, same deal. If we zoom in on it, we can see certain areas like under the chin. I've left a bit so I can do these dark lines. Also the dress, I'll probably do that in blue. Tail and her legs. So let's do that. Okay. So a little bit of water and some dried leftover paint to make it really thick, and I just touch up some areas. Okay. And you might not want something like this, but that's perfectly fine. You'll make your own standards for all of your art processes. And this just happens to be mine. At the end of the day, it's all about making a good image, which is pretty much the main goal. Anything you can do to make it a better image, I say is fair. I don't usually put gouache or white over my paintings, and you can do that. Some people do that. So you gotta pick and choose what suits you. Some people are purists, some people multimedia, and they're like, it makes it look better. It's like, okay. Right, there's no real set rules except for what you make. Okay. Okay. It just gives it a little bit of definition. A little bit more oomph. So for her legs and knees, right? Let's go this way. Alright, I forgot that spray. That's right. So I always forget something sometimes. And that's okay. You'll catch it eventually. And what better time than when you're doing details. Alright. Now I also look at the undersides of things, but also where there's overlap. So I think I'm gonna, so you can tell this is overlapping that. And maybe some finger definition. Okay. And I'll come back with some other ones, but that is that. Now number 3. Number 3, and it's the same deal. Where we are now, if we get it in tight, that I've left some areas on the lower edges of things. For the legs, it is here, and there. And that was where I do my tightening up. So I dip the brush in water, get that excess water off. You don't need much. You're just trying to reactivate some of this dried paint. And so now it's thicker than it was when there was a lot of water. And then I go in and touch up, redefine some things. To me, it just makes for a better image overall. But again, everybody is different, has different tastes, and you can figure out what is right for you. I think I want to do some of this under. I just dipped it in water so that the paint that's already on the brush. Okay, and then back to paint. And so undersides, it just tightens it up. We got a fire truck. So it helps the forms pop just a bit. Okay. What else? So I've usually already baked it into the drawing where I should be focusing on doing these types of touch-ups. But again, it's your call. How you want it to look, how far you're willing to go. All of that. Okay. Sometimes edges get lost, especially after a wash down or after you've layered on a lot of colors. And this is just my way of reintroducing some of it back. This whole line. Now after washing, I dipped it in water, smooth this out a little bit, and back in. As I was saying, in the washing, we'll knock back or fade out some of this, and then I'll reintroduce some of it in the next round as well. And I do some in various colors, greens, blues, all of that. And I think when it offsets the chaotic flow of the watercolor, this tightening up just a touch, I think, in my opinion, helps. But again, it's just my opinion. None of this is factual, or this is just how I see it. I don't want to put my hand through there when I forgot this. And that is, all right. Now let's move on to some blue. Maybe some dark green too. Dark green first, or... All right, so now we're gonna do the greens before we do the blues, I think last. So again, some water, get the excess off into the dish. All right, we'll start with the light green. Although I'm not too worried about contaminating one from the other, but lighter is a great way to start. So we'll do the eyes, shirt, and then we'll use the dark for the other green bits. So this should be just tightening it up. And some for her shirt, mostly the undersides. All right. And now we can switch to, oh, actually, okay, now for some dark green. You don't need a lot of water. And we're just reactivating the color. But since it's been left out to dry, it's now more concentrated. All that excess water has evaporated out, leaving us with a very concentrated distilled color. And I use that to help shape this up. Okay, a little bit of touch-ups here. And now the dress, mostly the undersides, just to punch it up just a little bit. Also, we can do some of the shadows. All right, dress done. Now for number 2. All right, now again, it's time for the greens. And dip the brush in the water, and I still have some dark one on it, but I'm not too worried. And again, we tighten up some things, especially the eyes. I like the eyes to be very crisp, and there's a lot of things you can do with eyes. A lot of colors you can layer onto and into. At the end, sometimes I make the white highlight by scratching it out with an X-Acto, but I'll show you that when we get to it. So, shirt, okay. Now because we have this snake here, I think I'm also going to do some of this. This one's going to get a lot of darker green, but I want to start that process. And let's do the mouth. Okay, for the dress, again, dip it in water, get the excess off on into the paint, so you can add less water for more saturated, more pure pigments. And again, making sure I wasn't putting my hand in wet. Okay, so snake. Now because I work in layers, or phases, versions, verses, whatever you want to call it, it allows me to do some things, and that is planning for the future. So now that I have the base coat, I have an idea with color where I can go. When I wash it down, I can then reintroduce colors and even shift colors. We'll talk about that as we get to that. But essentially, I can introduce a color, wipe it down, it'll knock that back, and I can reintroduce another color. But that first color will still be somewhat there. So if I wanted to shift the green to a blue green, I can lay down the greens first, wash it, and then next round introduce darker blues, wash that down, and then introduce blues and purples. And so you'll get some underneath colors that can show. And it takes more work, but the results can be really satisfying. Dipped it in water because I'm using a fair amount. That's too much. There you go. Alright, I think that, well, I forgot the snake. Go this way, then this way. That sounds like an idea. Let's do this under. Okay, maybe some for this. And, alright, and that is, should this be blue or should this be green? I'll make it blue later. Alright, and that is number 2. All right. Number 3, and you get the deal. Brush, dipped it in water. Get the little water beadlets to drip into the paint. Mix that around for a little bit. And you can decide how saturated, how condensed you want it. Right, down here there's more water. Up here there's less. And then you go in and sharpen things up. Again, concentrated. There you go. And then we'll do part of the tank top, which is this light green. Mostly concentrating on areas with shadow or on the undersides. Okay, and we can do some areas of the dress. Also, we can punch up some of this. Anything else? Let's do the light side. It's too much. And now for the dark green, same. Water, drip that. We don't want too much. We're just trying to reactivate and have it more concentrated. And then we go in and we tighten areas. I used to do this the most at the end of the entire painting process. But I was finding I was having lost edges, which is good sometimes. But sometimes I want to reintroduce some of the most important lines, like for her eyes and certain bits. But again, that's me. Okay. All right. And I think we're just about done with the green. Do some light effects. All right. So that was the green. Tighten up with green, and now we'll do some blue. For I think that's just about it. I could do the magenta for under her nose, but we'll do that in the blue phase. All right. I think this is going to be the final round of this phase. And so now I have a little bit of water. Again, I take my brush, dip it in water, and then get the excess off into the dried dish, or dried color in this dish. And with that, I did some magenta that I will just reactivate. So water, it reactivates dried paint. So you can keep the paint that you've already used and then just reactivate it with water, make sure you mix it well, and then go in for another round. And I usually can do that for 2, maybe 3 before I have to wash it out and then start again. But with this, I can now do some detail work like noses, the underside of her nose, just for some added detail on that. And then we're going to go to the blue. Blue is a color I use a lot for this because there's a lot of, the blue will simulate the pencil outlines, but also with the touch-ups. So for example, the eyes, I want the eyes to catch. I want it to be one of the most important things that the viewer sees. And so I go in and touch up the outlines of the eyes. And you can add all sorts of colors into the eyes and eyelashes. Sometimes it's a purple, sometimes it's a blue. I've even done green underpaintings, all to try to see what happens. Okay. I sometimes do the upper part of the eye itself because I want to transition it down dark to a faded. And we'll do the same for the other eye. Again, it's easier to pull towards yourself, paint towards yourself, than paint away. Maybe it's just a muscle thing. Also, something of note is that the detailing process can be a fairly long one because you're no longer doing large sweeping areas. You are now hyper focused in certain places. And for some reason, trying to get those certain places just right can cause an amount of thoughtfulness that sometimes I don't quite have the patience for. And yes, it makes for better art and whatnot, but sometimes you're like, I just want to move. Next painting, but we'll get there. I'm redefining the teeth. I can do the lower lip. Okay. And what else? So you can see the sorrel paper. When I was transferring it down, I used those as the lines to paint within. But now they're just guides to keep me moving, and the color feels better than the sorrel paper outlines. And you can make them multicolored. You can make them any colors you wish as long as the image looks good to you. Okay. I think next round I'll do blues into these shadows. But at this stage, I'm trying to remind myself where certain things begin and end. And painting in these lines, to me, helps the most. But again, personal mileage may vary. You do you. All right, let's do this. All right. Oh, I forgot the green, but we'll get it next round. All right, I think we are done with this one. We'll let it dry, then we'll take another look, and but I think we're good. Everything's here. It's got the wet and wet of each individual areas, the orange, the brown, the greens, the blues. So it's looking pretty good. Okay, number 2, blues. First we're going to do some magenta and reactivate it, some water, and then come back for that nose just to give it some definition. Maybe the corner of the eyes. Okay, now blue time. I'll dip it in water, get the extra into the dish, and then I have a small pool here, and then whatever I pull up and away will be even more concentrated. And you're trying to get that just right consistency. Not too watery, not too dry. And then you use that to touch up the paint. Eyelashes, eyes, undersides of certain areas, whatever you think can benefit. I forgot that. Get that right consistency. It's like Goldilocks. Not too wet, not too dry. Now this one has the boldest lines because we did, I think, all of this dry brush. So already it's more, the colors are brighter and bolder than the other two. So it doesn't need too much. We're just touching it up. We get some of those eyes. And this should help for the next round to help not get the, to help keep the lines instead of losing the lines later. All right, get the teeth, and now all the little areas that I can now see and want to preserve. Okay, let's see. Let's do this. Green and blue go really well together. Of course, being on the color wheel, they're right next to each other. So greens and blues usually can be standouts. Okay. And, alright. Oh, I forgot. Alright. This one didn't need too much, I don't think. I think I also want some magenta in that. This tongue. So we clean the brush, more or less. And then some of this color. And, alright. So that, whoa. While I'm here, sometimes I do the feetsies. A magenta or a pink is a nice color for this because it has that nice brightness to it, that if you see certain areas of your body like ears, hands, feet, if you hold them up to light, that reddish underneath really starts to pop. So that's what I'm simulating here. And that is number 2. All right, number 3, same deal. We did water, magenta. Well, it started as pink. Now it's like a pink magenta. And we'll touch up things like her nose. You could also do some for her ears, if you are so inclined. So some of her wings. Inner eye. And feet, hands and feet. But I have specific. But it gives that nice, warm, live. Whoa. And this. And of course we'll reintroduce some pinks in here in the next phase, the next round. The second verse, which is a lot like the first. Okay, so that is the pinks, and now let's go back to the blues. Shake off the color in the water bucket. I'm not too concerned with contamination of magenta into blue, because that blue will pretty much make that magenta a non-factor. So spread it out a little bit. The more you get away from the pool of water and color, you'll get a more concentrated. And then we go in with, I have to remember that some of this is still wet. But things like fingernails, or certain parts of fingernails. Because we'll really work on this during the detailing phase. So any place I started with sorrel paper to get the image down, I can go over with some blue for touch-ups, highlights, definition, or more defining the image. But mostly I do the details. And again, I can shift the colors however which way I want. And I'll show that in later phases. Give this eye its proper. Okay. And next eyelash. And what I like about this channel, this is just random musings from myself, is that it allows me to get work done. Like sometimes I avoid doing things, you know, classic procrastination. You're like, that sounds kind of hard. I don't know if I want to do that. But if you do it for the channel, it's a great excuse. So this is just random from me to you, right? If you ever want to be an artist, think about starting a YouTube channel and then just doing stuff for the channel that you would normally do or think about normally doing, because it gives you that extra spark of motivation. Also, it helps refine thinking. I think I haven't really thought about how I do things until I do them for the channel, and then I'm like, or trying to explain how you do something to somebody you don't know. It's like, how would I explain that? It's interesting. I kind of like it. It's okay. I like it a lot. It's just different. It's my excuses seem silly. It's just do it. Do it for the channel. It's like, okay. And mostly art isn't, I don't find it hard. It's fun. I think the hardest part is over analyzing, and it's just all steps. It's like first you do this step, okay, and then you do this step, and after that step it'll look pretty much like a painting, and then after that step you just do step 1 and 2 again. Yeah, it's very art's not hard, it's just steps. Art is fun. And I think for the light rays, I'm going to do different colors. Just like a rainbow of colors. Just coming off. Okay. And trying to think, lights here. This is going to be darker. Right. At least that's the thinking. This. Okay. We're almost done. Let's make this a blue. Just knock that back a bit. And in watercolor, you can only layer things. Well, that's not totally true. I try to only layer things so much because then it starts to get wonky and muddy. And I think if I did much more of this, then it would get to that. But currently, we're good. All right. Toenails. Okay, some of that, and sometimes when you're painting, the edges can get fuzzy, and I think this helps in tightening up and getting rid of some of that fuzz. You can tell I'm a professional because I use the word watercolor fuzz. I never even thought about that until, again, sometimes you just do things as an artist and you're like, I didn't even know I just did that or why I did that. And there's usually a reason, you just never really thought about it that hard. All right, so that is number 3. So give me a moment and then we'll talk about some things. All right, so now I want to talk about an alternative to what we have been doing presently, but this is an alternate way of doing things. I do things differently in different cases. This one is on wooden board with some of that paper tape, so it's taped down and secured. For larger paintings, this is what I usually do. Have it secured to a board, watercolor paper cut out, have the image on here with sorrel paper. But I usually sometimes go over, in larger paintings, the outlines in different colors. So I have some orange, some blues, some purples, greens. So everything is mapped out in its own color, where it's supposed to be, and all of that. Right, so ultra close. And then once I have this, then I start on the background. And then from the background, and then I go into the color. On larger pieces, I work slightly differently, where I have all of the colors of the same type laid out, and then I wet it down and then introduce those colors. It's a little bit more random, a little bit more chaotic, and needs a little bit more time to do all that, but it's the same ideas from what we've been doing, but this is on a slightly larger scale. I change my process and approach for larger pieces. So let's go back to what we have been doing, what we do have. So for number 1, this is where we're at right now. So we have wet into wet was the primary thing that we did for all of this. We wet the whole thing, then we did pink, then we did orange, the red, brown for her hair, the various greens, and then the blues, and then we lastly tighten that up with some dry brushing with concentrated watercolor that has been dried out, and then we introduce just a little bit of water. So that's number 1. This is like a recap of what we did for the week. Number 2, slightly different. What we did was we did no wet until wet. That means we did not pre-wet the paper. We just took the colors from here and then applied them onto the paper. So the colors are a little bit richer, a little bit deeper, and it looks more clean, less chaotic. And that is what one can do with watercolor. And number 3, done much like number 1, where we wet the area, then introduce the colors. But for this, we didn't do all of the whole thing in pink. We did the flesh in pink as an underpainting, and then we introduced the orange brown for her hair, then the greens, then the blues, and then lastly, and the stripes in brown. Then lastly, we touched up some of the areas that we want to be more defined in brown, blue, green, just for some touch-up to punch that up just a bit. And this is how they look now. This is how they are right now, and that is what we did for the week. And this is how they look now. So we're gonna wash it down, let it dry. We're gonna let it dry for a day, then wash it down tomorrow, and then on Monday we'll come back and get started on phase 2, round 2, verse 2 of this water painting saga. This is going to be maybe 3 parts. So I'll see you in 2 weeks, where I'll show you what we do for phase 2. So until next time, thank you for joining me. I have been Trey Hodges. You can find my work at treyhodges.com. Power to all the creators, and I will see you in 2 weeks for phase 2 in watercolor of the summer sessions. Take care, keep shining.